I'm Juan. I'm the founder of Protocol Labs, and we build IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, and Filecoin, a decentralized storage network. The IPFS protocol, it solves a few of the problems. I mean, there's a lot of problems here, and requires a ton of different pieces of work to build an infrastructure that's safe, robust, and secure, and much harder to attack or bring down. IPFS addresses a few problems. It addresses problems around finding and naming content. So it makes it difficult to censor content. It makes it easy for communities that want to distribute content to keep doing so. It makes it easy to create, to give permanence to content, to address it in such a way that is very difficult to lose and forget. It makes it easier for certain applications to be built such that people in the developing world can access them better. The web right now is pretty expensive when you're in a region of the world with large latencies or really low bandwidth and things like that. And so IPFS presents a different model of how to do the content distribution that makes that better, makes it easier for people in those areas to use applications. So Filecoin is a decentralized storage network, and so it plays a role. You can think of it as the cloud storage component of a decentralized network. So think of it a bit like, say, Amazon S3 or a Google Cloud type storage service. And the point is to create a decentralized storage system that also creates a market for storage. Like think of it like as a proper free market for buying and selling storage over time. Today, when you look at how people use storage, there's like these pretty large-scale contracts that you have to engage with Amazon or other people or other companies and so on. That effectively locks out a lot of smaller players from being able to compete with Amazon. But if you had a proper market, unify all of the storage providers around the world that are not Amazon or these other players, you can actually compete with them and get as much storage as them in exactly the right parts of the world where you need it. Not only that, but you can imagine a lot of players that are not currently storage providers coming online on the network to add storage that they have. So there's a lot of individuals and companies that have a lot of spare storage that they could add to this network. So that's some of the components. The other part is doing building a blockchain with a proof of work that doesn't just burn cycles and waste energy, but where the proof of work is actually doing something useful, which is storing files or proving that people are storing files. So Ethereum, IPFS, and Filecoin are really complementary technologies. So on the one hand, so IPFS and Ethereum, there's a lot of different applications that use both of those projects. So they will use Ethereum for the application logic, and then they'll store and address data on IPFS. And so there's a number of applications doing that already. They're addressing all their content and user data and so on with IPFS, and they're just using the contracts part of Ethereum to run the application. There's also an effort to rethink how Ethereum itself could be there's this longer history or set of components that Ethereum is built up through, things called dev P2P and so on, like a whole peer-to-peer interaction layer. And there's examples of Ethereum running on top of IPFS. So we did a demo last year at DevCon 2 where they had an Ethereum node entirely in the browser, completely in the browser, not touching any kind of backend at all, or the command line tool or anything. And it was connecting to the rest of the Ethereum network by bridging through the IPFS network first. So it got connected to the rest of the network through IPFS because our network library supported that kind of use case. And so there's a lot of possible integrations here where the project stacks kind of can work with each other, and there's a lot of really valuable components that can be shared. Then on the Filecoin side, a lot of the Filecoin tech will use Ethereum tech. So we'll be using a lot of the same exact code bases and projects and so on. And so Filecoin is based on Ethereum. It previously was going to be a chain on top of Ethereum, but then we solved a really fundamental problem around proof of work, which forced us to build our own chain. But we will use the same code bases as Ethereum, and we'll use the EVM, and there will be a whole bunch of connector contracts that enable participants in Ethereum to ask the Filecoin network to store data, and vice versa. So it'll be like a native experience. Ethereum contracts will be able to store data on Filecoin and pay for it with Ether. I think this conference brings together a great set of people. It brings together people working in the deep technology platforms that are being built. It brings application developers. It brings users, investors, and so on. It's like a good representation of the whole ecosystem. Coming together to discuss at a high level what everybody's working on and what are the next challenges ahead and what people should be thinking about and working on. There's the talks, of course, and then there's the conversations that are happening beside that are super useful and valuable. Filecoin can be extremely transformative in how we store and address data on the network, where previously people went from hosting their own data in data centers to then hiring the professional cloud services, things like Amazon and Google and so on, and that was a big shift. Then so can be the shift of going from trusting one set of parties to then trusting the whole network and getting proofs that the content is there, and getting proofs that the content is being stored for long periods of time, and getting much greater certainty over the likelihood of that, along with collaterals. Like if your data is lost in any way, then maybe you get a reward back. So that's one piece. The other piece where Filecoin can be massively transformative is in helping communities hold data together. So this means there are a lot of groups out there in the world where it's not one organization storing data and paying for it, but it's multiple stakeholders with some important data set that belongs to that community or is about that community. So there's things like scientific data sets, there's like government records, there's a ton of really huge data sets like this that don't really belong in the normal traditional cloud, and they've always had a hard time moving into that world, and they fit the Filecoin idea much better because all of these stakeholders come together, add their content and data to Filecoin once, and then as a pool of organizations and individuals, pool their resources and money to hire the network to store it long term. Filecoin brings a lot of very interesting use cases that aren't really doable or possible in the cloud today, along with things like agents and contracts that can do things like try and prove that your data is stored with certain kind of latency requirements or stored in certain regions of the world and so on. There's a lot of work to do to reach those points, but there's a lot of potential there. The last thing I'll mention is cost. So by adding a massive amount of supply that is currently not for sale, but is there. There's a lot of disks out there that are doing nothing right now. By adding all of that supply to the network, then we can significantly drop the cost of storage, or at least that's the hope. We have good reason to believe that this is possible, and we look forward to making storing humanity's data cheaper, safer, and much more useful. A blockchain is an immutable record, so it's a distributed system in a network that is forming an immutable record with certain properties like censorship resistance and consensus over the last value. So the idea is that, and that there's a lot of jargon there, but boiling it down, it's about achieving consensus on reality. Meaning, if you have certain accounts, people paying other people for stuff and so on, is how do you get agreement on what happened in history? So if person A, if Alice paid Bob $10, and then Bob paid Charlie $20 or whatever, can you create a record for all of that none of those people can tamper with and change? And so it's about getting it to be verifiable so that anybody can look at this and check that it's correct. And it's about getting it to be a single version of history. And so that's where the consensus part comes in. And blockchains enable you to get these records. You can think of them as distributed ledgers, right? It's a ledger of transactions. It really just means a list of line items, a list of line items that nobody can change. And by getting that immutability, then that becomes extremely useful for a lot of applications, from payment systems to identity to organizing work in a large shared work thing, to tracking assets, to creating digital scarcity. Everything from virtual goods to new kinds of social networks can run in a decentralized way using this kind of tech. So it becomes extremely useful. It's a really powerful primitive that enables a lot of these other applications to work. And the key thing is that by making it, again, immutable and unchangeable and verifiable, you no longer have to trust the participants. So that's what causes a decentralization to happen. Bitcoin was the first blockchain system, and it is it has a currency associated with it. It's a proof of work based network, and it has a scripting system that did a lot for when it was built. but it's quite limited in what it can do on purpose. And Ethereum is like a next generation blockchain on top of that. It's a system and project that was developed by learning through a lot of what Bitcoin did well, and what it did poorly. And it's kind of like, you can think of it kind of like a V2, and a much more improved system in a bunch of directions. Now, there's certain things that Bitcoin has that Ethereum doesn't. Like, I think Bitcoin has broader and greater adoption for now, but Ethereum is growing super fast, and that may not be the case for much longer. And certainly for when you look at it from an application perspective, Ethereum is way more powerful and versatile, and you can use it for constructing many new kinds of things. Certainly any groups that want to issue any kind of digital asset, it is much easier to do so on top of Ethereum. People that want to think about identity and how like building kind of like sovereign identity is, I would claim, is much easier to do it on Ethereum. You can also do it on Bitcoin, but it's kind of clunkier and harder. So just the contract language, it's an evolution. So you can think of Ethereum as an evolution of Bitcoin. And Ethereum itself has sparked a ton more interesting work that has improved Ethereum over time and has created new projects. You have a ton of resources around the world that are not used very well, and you have massive inefficiencies here. You can think of this as like the Airbnb problem, or the Lyft and Uber problem, like any kind of sharing economy type thing. So it's a very tangible, real world problem. You can build companies that go out and organize the work around these markets and create a sharing economy thing. And that has worked for Airbnb and Lyft and Uber and these kind of organizations. But you can also do it in a way that puts the people that are adding the value in the network first. Meaning that today, Airbnb, Lyft, and Uber, and so on, captured the majority of the value created by those markets went to those companies. And the hosts or drivers capture very little of the value created by those networks. So instead, if you use token-powered systems, so this is where with a blockchain you can organize a much better network. You can create a network where people use a token as a medium of exchange in this network. So for example, if imagine like a token-powered Airbnb or a token-powered Lyft or something, where the drivers and the hosts would be taking these tokens instead, then they can earn a piece of the worth of the network over time. And so they can effectively get some of the value that they help create with this new economy. So we're looking at the storage market, specifically the cloud storage market, and realizing that that's exactly what it needs. It needs a sharing economy type protocol, but it's a much more technical solution. Something much higher level like Airbnb or a company like that wouldn't quite have worked in this environment. But when you make it entirely algorithmic, then you can create effectively a market. Think of it like a real exchange market with asks and bids and so on for storage, and you can have a ton of people trading storage all the time, and so that can make the whole system much more efficient and allow a lot of players around the world that have a lot of disks to bring them online and share them with the rest of the world and get paid for doing so. And it allows a lot of clients to hire people in all of those places without having to default to the few options that they previously had.